She told me something that made my stomach turn. When a witch looks at you in the spirit, they're not seeing your face, they're reading your light signature. And most Christians don't have one. You're walking around thinking you're protected, but in the realm where spells are sent and assignments are written, you're showing up blank, transparent, unguarded. And the witches who target believers, they're not guessing who to attack. They're reading exactly what you've been hiding, what you've been feeding, and where your armor has holes you don't even know exist. I sat across from her in a coffee shop, and she wouldn't stop staring past my shoulder. This woman, we'll call her Maria, had spent 12 years as a practicing witch before encountering Jesus in a way that shattered her entire understanding of power. But even now, months into her new faith, she still saw things, not because she wanted to, but because when you've trained your spiritual eyes to see in that realm, they don't just close because you prayed a prayer. Can I tell you what I used to see when I looked at Christians? She asked. I nodded. Most of them looked like empty frames. She explained it like this: imagine walking into an art gallery at night. Some frames have paintings that glow in the dark, rich, vivid, impossible to ignore. But other frames are just empty. The frame exists, the structure is there, but there's no image inside, no light, no presence. That's what powerless Christians look like in the spirit, she said. The frame is there because they go to church. They own a Bible, maybe they pray sometimes. But there's nothing inside the frame that makes a demon hesitate. I asked her what made the difference. She leaned forward. The ones who scared us weren't the ones who talked the most about Jesus. They were the ones who had spent time with him in secret. You could see it. Their frame wasn't empty. It was full of something we couldn't touch. It was like they carried a fire we weren't allowed to get close to. Here's what Maria revealed that most believers never consider: the spiritual realm isn't symbolic, it's more real than the physical. And in that realm, your actual devotion, not your claimed devotion, shows up like a report card. Witches don't need to guess if you're a threat, they can see it. She described how Covens would assign targets. They'd scout churches, events, even scroll through social media. But the selection process wasn't random. They were looking for gaps. Christians who had authority in title, but no substance in spirit. Believers who wore crosses, but had secret compromise. People who prayed in public, but had never learned to war in private. We called them decorative Christians. Maria said, and I'll never forget that phrase, decorative Christians are everywhere. They look the part. They know the songs, the lingo, the gestures. But in the realm where witches operate, they're see-through. And when a spell is sent their way, it doesn't bounce off. It walks right in, because there's no substance to stop it. But then Maria said something that changed everything. The ones we couldn't touch, they had scars. She explained that true warriors in the spirit don't glow because they're perfect. They glow because they've been through fire and didn't abandon their post. Every time they chose worship in the middle of depression, a light turned on. Every time they forgave, when bitterness made more sense, another layer of armor formed. Every secret hour they spent in God's presence when no one was watching, that became a weapon we could see but couldn't counter. It's like scar tissue, she said. It's proof you've been in battle and survived. And in the spirit, scar tissue glows brighter than anything else. Here's the part that should wreck you. The enemy isn't afraid of your theology. He's afraid of your intimacy. Because intimacy with God creates a light signature that makes you untouchable. Not because you're special, but because you've become occupied. There's no room for the enemy's assignment, because something else already lives there. So ask yourself, if a witch looked at you right now in the spirit realm, what would they see? An empty frame or a fire they can't extinguish? Why most Christians appear as empty frames in the spirit, and what witches look for when selecting their targets. When witches operate in the spiritual realm, they're not seeing with natural eyes. They're viewing energy fields, light signatures, and spiritual authority levels. According to ex-practitioners, most Christians appear as outline shapes with nothing inside. The frame exists because of church attendance, Bible ownership, and Christian identity, but there's no actual spiritual substance filling that frame. It's like a uniform without a soldier inside it. Witches specifically look for these empty frames because they represent zero resistance. They scan for believers who have religious activity but no genuine relationship with God. The selection process is strategic. They observe who prays only in crisis, who has unconfessed sin, creating spiritual holes, who knows Scripture intellectually, but has never experienced God's presence personally. They look for Christians whose worship is performance, whose faith is inherited rather than chosen, whose prayer life is sporadic at best. These believers are primary targets because curses, spells, and demonic assignments face no opposition. There's no light to push back against the darkness. The frame is there, but it's hollow, and in the spirit realm, hollow things get filled by whatever shows up first. This is why some Christians experience constant spiritual attack despite their religious activity. They're visible to the enemy, but not fortified against him. The difference between decorative faith and fire carriers, and why secret devotion creates light signatures the enemy can't touch. Decorative Christians are believers who have perfected the external appearance of faith without cultivating internal reality. They know worship songs, carry Bibles, post scripture on social media, and use Christian language fluently. But in the spirit realm, this decorative faith produces no light. It's religious costume without spiritual substance. Fire carriers, on the other hand, are believers whose lives have been fundamentally transformed by genuine encounter with God. The difference shows up most clearly in secret. Decorative Christians pray when people are watching, worship when it's convenient, and read scripture when they need something. Fire carriers have built a hidden life with God that nobody sees. Early morning prayer, midnight worship, fasting that isn't announced, forgiveness that costs them everything, obedience in small things that nobody applauds. This secret devotion creates what witches describe as an untouchable light signature. It's not religious activity that produces this light. It's authentic intimacy. Every hour spent in God's presence when you'd rather sleep, every moment of worship when depression told you to quit, every act of obedience that made no logical sense. These build a spiritual frequency that witches can see but cannot penetrate. The fire isn't borrowed from a church service or transferred from a powerful preacher. It's cultivated in the hidden place, and that makes it permanent, personal, and untouchable by demonic interference. What spiritual scar tissue really is, and why your hidden battles create the exact armor that makes you untouchable to witchcraft. In the natural realm, scar tissue forms when your body heals from deep wounds. It's tougher, denser, and more resistant than regular skin. The same principle operates in the spirit realm. Spiritual scar tissue forms when you fight battles that nobody sees and refuse to abandon your faith in the process. It's created when you worship God through depression that tried to kill you. It forms when you choose forgiveness after betrayal shattered you. It appears when you kept praying despite years of silence, when you obeyed God, even when it cost you relationships, when you rejected bitterness and chose trust instead. Witches reveal that these scars glow in the spirit realm, not because they're pretty, but because they're proof of survival. They show the enemy that you've already been through fire and didn't break. Each scar represents a battle where darkness attacked and you outlasted it. This makes you a nightmare for witchcraft operations because your history proves you can't be easily destroyed. Witches avoid heavily scarred believers the same way bullies avoid fighters with broken noses. The damage proves they know how to take a hit and keep standing. Your hidden battles aren't wasted pain. They're being transformed into the exact armor that makes you immune to attacks that would destroy decorative Christians. The enemy fears your scars more than your gifts, how to close the gaps witches exploit, and why intimacy with God is the only thing that makes you invisible to demonic assignment. Spiritual gaps are created by areas of your life where God's presence hasn't been invited. Unconfessed sin, unforgiveness, secret addictions, hidden compromise, neglected prayer life, biblical ignorance. These create openings that show up like cracks in armor when viewed from the spirit realm. Witches are trained to identify these gaps because they represent legal access points for curses and assignments. A Christian with gaps is like a house with unlocked doors. The structure exists, but entry is easy. The only way to close these gaps is through genuine intimacy with God. And here's why: intimacy isn't about religious performance. It's about surrender, transparency, and continuous presence. When you cultivate real relationship with God, His presence begins to occupy every room of your life. The areas you used to keep private get flooded with light. The sins you used to hide get confessed and cleansed. The bitterness you nursed in secret gets dissolved by worship. Intimacy makes you invisible to demonic assignment, not because you become sinless, but because you become occupied. There's no room for the enemy's plans because God's presence has filled every gap. This is why the most untouchable believers aren't necessarily the most publicly anointed. They're the ones who have learned to live in constant communion with God, where every thought, every decision, every moment is filtered through His presence. When you're that full of God, assignments sent your way find no place to land.